Welcome to Weldcast, a digital project from the High Plains Library District. This project records, documents, and preserves the rich artistic history of Weld County and its residents through storytelling. The stories are stored digitally and are available to all users online at weldcast.com. Today's Weldcast takes us to the University of Northern Colorado in Greeley. Specifically to the James A. Michener Library, where we'll be hearing from head archivist Jay Trask. Jay showed me around the archives when I visited.
It's alarmed.
Wow.
Okay.
That's official.
It is, and then close the door because it's cold in here.
Some of the things we saw are what you'd expect.
University records here, and it's just a huge row of boxes with like presidential files and board of trustees minutes and student newspapers and things like that.
Some of the things we saw were quite special.
Not that long ago, we just got a bunch of Native American artifacts that the university used to own, and then in the 80s when they shut down their anthropology museum, they shipped it off to different places throughout the state. But the Fine Arts Center down in Colorado Springs called us a couple of years ago and said, hey, we've got all this Native American stuff that's yours, take it back. So it's Native American pots, and there's like a war bonnet, and there's moccasins and things like that.
The university specializes in collecting James Michener's materials, which sometimes look like what you'd expect.
Correspondence and his like manuscripts, like drafts of manuscripts, and the galleys are up here.
Oh, cool.
And then so you'll see his handwritten edits. And Michener's really interesting how he so he like would literally cut and paste. So if he got something and he didn't like a word, he would just cut it out, or he would paste entire paragraphs on, and so it'd be like this weird kind of like
a ransom note.
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of what it looks like. It's always kind of strange.
Okay.
We try to collect in all formats, and we also collect all the various translations.
Oh yeah.
So,
and
yeah.
some books on tape here.
Yeah, books on tape, yeah, so old cassettes and things like that.
And sometimes the Michener collection takes on a different tone.
This is a bootleg that he collected, and he collected it because he loved the cover.
A bootleg of his own book.
Of his own book.
Oh.
It was not...
It's a passionate embrace of what appears to be two ladies there.
Yes.
Which book is this?
This is The Drifters,
Okay.
and that has nothing to do with the book, but they were selling it in Turkey.
The university also collects and archives material of local star and sci-fi legend Connie Willis.
There's some rejection letters in there, which are cool. So, like, there's rejection letters even for really famous pieces, like All My Darling Daughters, which is like in any kind of science fiction sex book. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, if it's an anthology, All My Darling Daughters is going to be in there, and it's rejected a million times. It seemed like, from
Just
correspondence.
like, what are you guys doing?
Oh yeah, I know. It's just crazy.
All this to say there's a lot of stuff in the archives. But what isn't as evident right away is how the stuff gets here. How do they decide what stays and what goes? Who picks? Who is this archivist anyway? I sat down with Jay to find out.
My name is Jay Trask, and I am the head of archival services and an associate professor of university libraries at the University of Northern Colorado.
Archival versus archival? Is
Yeah.
this an industry standard?
It's
or?
the industry standard in the West, at least.
Oh,
So,
okay.
we always say archival here in everybody I know in Colorado and west of the Mississippi. It might be different back east, but yeah.
See, I'm learning already.
I know.
I'm
That's
learning so
exciting,
much.
yeah.
And then, if you can give me kind of the more casual version. So in other words, you meet someone and they're like, so what do you do? And you say the title, but then they're like, okay, but what do you do?
Yeah, so what I normally sum up with, I either say I'm an archivist, I'm head of archives at the university, and then to kind of say my super sum up version is I take care of the old stuff at the university. So, and then I give a couple of examples, like I'll take care of old photographs and old documents and things like that. And that normally satiates somebody's basic curiosity unless they actually care about those kind of things.
Okay.
Then
Unless
I can go
they're
into,
deeply involved
yes, then I can go into greater depth.
I see what you're saying. I think we all have that, right? That thing where we say, all right, here's the 2 sentence version, and then we can see, does this person actually want to know, or
Right.
were they just like, that's the thing we ask people at parties or
Yes,
whatever.
I know. And I'm super concerned about that, like, because maybe it's my nerdy nature, and that like I love comics and I love science fiction-y type stuff, and I don't ever want to be that nerd that imposes that on
Oh,
someone
sure.
else.
Yes.
So when people ask me what I'm interested in, I've figured ways, or what I do, I sum up. If they want to explore further, and they've opened up that door, it's
Right.
on them.
Right.
No longer it's not me
Pushing
covering
it.
them. Yeah, pushing, because like I care greatly about the fourth Robin.
Right.
But
Right.
no one else does. So
Right.
I don't want to be that person.
So that sounds kind of like there's a parallel in your personal life and then your work life. To say that, you work really deeply with things that probably a lot of people are just don't care about as much,
Yeah.
or they're like, put it in the archives,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of sounds like how your personal life sort of went into that. So how did you get started, in archiving professionally? I mean, how did this become a thing for you?
Well, it really kind of, I'll give you the full story because it is kind of cool, actually. I fell into archival work.
Okay.
I did my undergraduate at Fort Collins at CSU.
Okay.
And in my senior seminar, there was the discussion of, so what do you do now? And I knew I wasn't going to go high school teaching
Right.
route at all.
And were you history?
I was history.
Okay.
Yeah, I did history. And so the person who was the director of the senior seminar, he talked about the public history program that they have at CSU. And so public history is kind of the triumvirate of archival work, historic preservation, and museum work.
Okay.
And so I was actually interested in historic preservation, so buildings, when I first started going to graduate school there. But as I approached the end of my career as a graduate student, the guy who had been the head of that senior seminar called me and asked me if I needed a job, which I did. And there was a job at the National Wildlife Research Center. They
Okay.
needed somebody to work on archival photographs there to do sorting out of their historic photographs. So I took that job, and it was strangely horrific in that, because the National Wildlife Research Center, what they do is they're concerned with animal-human damage prevention. So a big chunk of like the photographs I was doing were photographs of animal kills to show like, this is when a bear kills a cow, this is how a bear will kill a cow. When
Wow.
a coyote kills a cow, this is how a coyote will do this.
So super up close, detailed photos
Detailed
of
photos.
Now, was that even remotely what you expected when you signed on for that?
It
Like,
was not at all.
You're like, it's going to be a deer out in a meadow.
Yes,
and-
it'll be pretty and like, happy raccoons or something like that. No, but it was also because the earlier incarnation of the National Wildlife Research Center didn't care about the preservation of animals, really. It was all about killing.
Okay.
So they're really historic photographs. So they're photographs from the teens and the 20s. There were tons of like, just where they sent out the government agents to kill rabbits or to kill crows.
I see.
And so I remember clearly one photograph, they had spelled out the number of dead rabbits using the rabbit bodies that
Wow.
they'd killed. So it was like 197, and it's just all a little pile of rabbits up in
How
front.
bizarre.
Yeah, and so it was a weird place to
Yeah.
work. The first week there, I got there was an email that went around that was like, we just got a shipment of squirrels in. We need help skinning these squirrels. Anybody want to come in after hours? It's like, no.
Like a squirrel skinning party,
A
huh?
squirrel skinning party, because they were trying to figure out percentage of poison in the squirrels.
Okay.
And they needed to do some sciencey thing to them.
They're like,
but-
great news.
Yeah.
We've got a bag of squirrel bodies.
Yeah.
This is kind of, sometimes in the library world back when, if you had a card catalog, right?
Yeah.
Like every couple of months you'd have like a catalog sorting party. So you'd take a section home to
Yeah.
someone's house and everyone would kind of sit around a table and maybe or maybe not have an adult beverage
Right,
and,
yes.
put the things in order, right?
Yeah.
So this sounds like the wildlife version of that,
Yeah.
but much more intense.
Much more intense, yeah. And on the tour too, I remember there was They were working with brown tree snakes
Okay.
as well. So brown tree snakes are that invasive species that are island hopping in the Pacific, and they're killing all native wildlife. So they're figuring out ways to stop them. And so on the tour, they have like a snake room, but they have a snake like rolling pin. So they would when they killed a snake with figuring out whatever perfect poison to kill it with.
Okay.
They'd freeze dry it, and then they'd like use their rolling pin to make like a snake powder to figure out the exact chemical compounds and exact chemical.
Whoa.
Yeah.
So they kind of pulverize like a mortar and pestle
Yeah.
almost, and then wow.
Yeah, it was crazy. So it was an introduction that archival world can be really weird. So it was kind of cool. Well, I was there for not very long because it was a contract position. Like, let's get these
Okay.
horrific photographs cataloged and organized.
Yeah.
And then my professor, who had been on that senior seminar, called again while I was at work at this other place and said, "Hey, do you still need a job?" Because the state archives was hiring, and he knew
okay.
the state archivist. He's like, "I'll just call him, and you should have that job." And I went down, and it was the most awkward interview I'd ever had. He just asked me like about my family, told me about his son. Like, it was really strange. The only thing that was real was they wanted to make sure I could climb a ladder and carry 50 pounds of 50-pound box over my head as I climbed a ladder.
Oh, interesting.
So
Now, did they have like a ladder and a box there, and they're like, "All right, pick this up"?
they actually took us into the basement, and it looked very reminiscent of that, the famous Indiana Jones scene.
Where they're putting away the.
Yeah, there's just miles and miles of boxes down in
Wow.
the basement, and they're like, "All right, climb that ladder, get the fourth box back there," because that meant you had to move
Okay.
4 boxes and then bring it down, carry it back up, put it away. All right, you're hired. And it's kind of expected in archival jobs. You will have people who will make sure that you can carry heavy boxes around.
So if you're like a former bodybuilder, world's strongest, whatever,
Yeah.
might want to look into archives
Yes,
because
it's
they might be
beautiful, yeah.
like, this is a
Can carry 2.
broad-shouldered, stout individual who could get a lot of work done
Right?
here. Yeah.
He can move 4 or 5 boxes.
Double our
around. Yeah.
productivity.
It'd be beautiful. Yeah. But I was at the state archives, and early in my career, I didn't stick around places that long.
Sure.
I was at state archives for less than 2 years.
Okay.
And then I went down to Pueblo to work at abandoned at the Color Fuel and Iron company, and they abandoned all their records. So I was there for 5 years. And then,
Just kind of sitting is it a whole abandoned facility or just their records they turned over? Or?
yeah, it was kind of cool because there was so CF&I used to be like the biggest employer in all of Colorado. It was a huge deal here in Colorado. They owned mines throughout the West. They owned mines up in Wyoming and New Mexico and Utah. And their big steel plant where they actually manufactured was down in Pueblo.
Okay.
And so in the 1980s, as American industry was contracting, CF&I kind of started to die. And so they just kind of shed buildings and did just abandoned areas of the mill. So where we were at was their old headquarters building, which was built in 1901. And it was just rooms were just filled with old abandoned records. So there was 20,000 linear feet of material there, and spread out in the old admin building plus several outbuildings that were around there.
Okay.
There was actually a place even called the Pit, which was literally a hole in the ground with with no covering, and then there were these side rooms that were filled with 19th century ledgers.
Wow.
Yeah.
And they're just in a pit, an actual pit.
An actual pit. And so
Wow.
there were work days to go there, and you'd have to, take a ladder to get down, and then early on you would just carry things one by one up the ladder. After I left, they went out and finally did a complete clean out of it, and they got a cherry picker or whatever those things are. I don't know. To reach down and actually load it up. So you're
That's
not.
good.
Yeah, that made a lot more sense. I was relying on Mormon missionaries, surprisingly. Mormon missionaries did a lot of carrying of boxes for me down in Pueblo.
That like as volunteers?
Yeah, I think because Mormons have a deep respect of the archival profession because of their genealogical interests.
Oh, interesting.
And so it was considered mission work to do work for us.
So they were doing their normal mission.
Yeah.
But then every so often they spend a day in the pit.
Yeah, carrying boxes up. Yeah, it was beautiful. Yeah.
Now, were they surprised because I'm surprised hearing this, I guess. I hadn't really thought about how archive work involves so much carrying and lifting, you know what I mean? Like warehouse almost work?
Right, yeah.
Were they surprised when they showed up and it was like, okay, you're going to get on this ladder?
Yeah, a little bit, yeah. It was, and students certainly were surprised.
Yeah.
Like when we'd get work study students who were like history majors who'd never...
Right.
They just assumed they were going to be coming and doing research or something.
Right. You're like, you may not want to wear that tweed jacket.
Yeah, you certainly may not. I remember at this place in Pueblo, it was an abandoned industrial facility, so it was all sorts of weird, crazy things, and half the students were petrified of ghosts and other, paranormal... Being
at the facility?
Yeah, because they just assumed because it's built in 1901 and it's dirty and creepy, it's going to be haunted. But I remember one time there was I had a work study student who kept coming up and was like, I hear something weird in the basement. I'm like, no, you don't. Get back to work. Quit your crying. And finally, I went with him, and there was a feral cat like giving birth, like right.
Oh wow.
It was beautiful, and those kittens lived there until we found a feral cat rescue place to come
cat ranch to come in.
Yeah, and they came and captured the cats and took them away, so we didn't see them. Yeah.
I had never considered that an archivist would be saying, so I was in this facility that everyone thought was haunted.
Yeah.
And it turned out to just be a cat, so we had to find someone to come take these feral cats, and you're like, things end up on your to-do list.
Yeah.
That you're like, I mean, did you feel prepared by, school and things for that, or was this all kind of...
Oh, God, no. No, not at all. Because we were winging it. Everybody who worked there, I was the head of archives, and this was like my second real job out of graduate school. Mm-hmm. So we were young, and, another great thing there was in the old drafting room, some of the windows were broken, so we'd get pigeons in there, and we'd have, I had one work study student who that was his job, was to hunt down the pigeons in the building and capture them and throw them out. He originally proposed that he would bring a gun and hunt them, actually hunt them. I'm like, no. We probably shouldn't do that. So he created some sort of net device that he ran through the... through the building hunting pigeons. And yeah, we'd get weird water leaks because it was near one of the big ditches in Pueblo, and so the water would just seep underneath and it'd start coming up. It was... Wow. I've kind of handled all sorts of weird archival problems, so I'm not really intimidated by any kind of...
Just take it as it comes, is that kind of the archivist way?
Yeah,
it's well, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, it'll be fine. What's the worst that can happen?
Well, on that topic, I mean, what are some of the more interesting finds you've come across, or that you've seen other people come across, or?
Yeah, I really do love doing archival work, and I think it's kind of amazing. And every place that I've worked has had really cool collections, and things that just do surprise you. The CF&I archives really has some super cool things, though. Some of my favorites from that were, so CF&I were, the easiest way to say it, they were the bad guys in the Ludlow massacre. Oh. So they were the company that were shooting miners and their family during the Ludlow massacre. So, and obviously it's heavy industry, and labor relations were always a big deal. So, in the 1920s, the industrial workers of the world had kind of a last big hurrah here in Colorado to try to unionize everybody and socialize the workforce. And CF&I not only planted spies in the union, they also sent some thugs over to steal all the IWW files.
Wow.
So those files were still in the records.
So you found those files
Yes.
when you were...
Yeah,
Wow.
and we found the spy reports. So the spies were never identified by name. There was X, double X, and triple X, and they would
interesting.
report back to mine managers and mine security and say things like, generally there's a lot of racism in there, especially against Eastern Europeans. CF and I really hated the Greeks. And they'd be like, there's 6 or 7 Greeks, they're coming up to your mine, they're going to ruin everything. But also, these spies were in there, they were agitating for violence. They were trying to provoke violence so that the mine managers could react with violence.
Oh, interesting.
Without seeming bad in the press.
So they were trying to like stir the pot.
Yeah.
To tip it over to violence, but to have it be like, well, they started it.
They started it, and so it's okay
Wow.
that we can go in and shoot them. And there was one of the coolest documents was it was like a shopping list that a mine manager submitted during one of these strikes, and the shopping list was like 50 sawed-off shotguns, like machine guns. They actually requested machine guns. They requested a plane in the 1920s. Some
To
gas
quell like a
to quell
group
a
of
strike.
miners, basically?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And they
An
wanted-
airplane.
Yeah, an airplane and gas grenades.
Wow.
So they were hoping to get surplus gas grenades from, probably the military. So
Yeah, I
they-
wonder who received that shopping list and what they're like, what is going on down there? Like,
There were always amazing things at that.
That's interesting.
Place. I also, and just on personal notes, because I'm from Southern Colorado.
Oh, okay.
And my grandpa worked at that, at the steel mill.
Oh.
As some of my uncles did as well. And I found my uncle's records.
like personnel
Yeah,
record?
their personnel records that were
Wow.
there. And so my grandpa's personnel record is this tiny little thing because he went to work every day and he never caused any problems. One of my uncles was this huge, massive, he was eventually let go because they found him sleeping during one of his shifts, and he sued them. It was a huge, long.
Interesting.
It was beautiful. Yeah.
So to see that contrast of
Yeah.
well, here's Grandpa. It's
Yeah.
got one sentence.
Yes.
And then it's huge. It's like in the movies, when they're like, can I see the file of such and such student? And it's, Bart Simpson,
Yeah.
and they throw this huge.
It's a whole drawer. Yeah, that's exactly
part
how it
A,
was,
Yeah.
So that was cool. I mean, working at the state archives, we had, there were weird things at the state archives as well. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation would deposit DNA type sample things with us. So CBI would show up and be checking out 20 boxes of bullets,
Wow.
that they could just, now that they had the DNA, the ability to check the genetic stuff on it, they would take it away. There would be, tons and tons of unrelated case files from all the different courts in the state. So I remember once, somebody was doing research on family history, right, which happens a lot, and they discovered that grandpa or great-grandpa or somebody had gone to court, and they wanted to find the record. So we found the record, and there was an actual transcript of the court case that happened in the late Victorian era. And I normally wouldn't censor anything, and I didn't censor anything, but I told the person, I'm not 100% sure that you're going to be happy with what you're finding out.
Oh, yeah.
Because it turned out that it was a sexual assault of a child, and once we gave I warned them it's not going to be pleasant, and once we gave it to them, then they wanted us to seal the record permanently, and we're like, no, we can't do that.
That doesn't work that way.
Yeah, you could put in a request with a judge,
Right.
But the judge is going to go, no, it's a public record.
I guess that's something I hadn't thought of either, but a lot of people do genealogical type research, but I think most of us kind of do it in hopes of I was related to Abraham Lincoln
Right,
or
yeah.
something, and you don't expect oh,
Yeah, it is mysterious. You never know. I mean, some people were excited. I mean, it depends on the crime that they find out.
Right.
So if you find out that like great aunt was a bootlegger,
Yes.
that's way different.
Well, we definitely feel differently about bootlegging.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh.
Because when you look at the state archives has all the prison photographs.
Oh, okay.
So it's crazy. Just speaking of the bootlegging and Prohibition era,
Uh-huh.
the huge jump in
the
number of people going to prison. It was just crazy, and a jump in how the people looked who were going to prison.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
early on, there's that kind of inherent bias in the
Mm-hmm.
system. There's an awful lot of Hispanic, criminals, and awful lot of, rough-looking men. But
Mm-hmm.
once you get to Prohibition, there's like 19-year-old woman is going,
Right,
going
right.
away for liquor violations.
That's
And
interesting.
it's a whole different.
Yeah, you can kind of see history play out that way, I
Right.
guess, when you look at the archive, right? Like
Yeah.
looking back, you can see those things. I wonder about too, at that time. So for example, you're saying a court record might be interesting for you genealogically. Like there might not, give an individual, like say your grandpa,
Yeah.
there's basically one sentence in his personnel
right, yeah.
file. There might not be a lot of stuff. Do you think that's like going to change a lot in the present time moving forward? I mean, now, people have choice. They put stuff online like Facebook, Twitter,
Right.
whatever. Not everyone does, but a lot of people do.
Yeah.
So do you think that's going to change a lot of that? And how do you think that'll change that kind of research or archiving work?
It's already changed, how the profession works. I mean, with even the birth of like the telephone, it changed how kind of business
Right.
business is done.
Yeah, there'd be less written stuff,
Yeah,
right?
there's
'Cause-
less evidence
Right.
of what happened. And now, I mean, Facebook and Twitter and email,
Mm-hmm.
it almost pushes it back the other way where there's too much.
to sort through.
Yeah,
And
because you can only save so much, and that's one of the
Right.
biggest challenges in archives, is you need to, and that's one of the biggest pressures on an archivist is to make the right decisions about what to save, what's actually worth saving. So like every single tweet that's made by, I don't know, like the lieutenant governor trying to give,
Right,
are those
right.
important enough to save?
Right.
And then if you go down further, like the tweets saved by individual random people, I mean,
Right.
does that matter?
Right.
What matters is to give you a good representation of the person, and how do you manage and save that material is super challenging,
Yeah.
because we've got to worry about accessibility
Right.
of electronic media
Right.
in 100 years. So, I mean, if you think like, are you going to get back to, that word perfect assignment that you did, in third grade, right? It's lost.
True.
We, at the state archives when I was there was a room full of optical discs that, as far as I understood it, there was nothing left in the state that could read those discs, but they were identified as permanent records for the state. So the information was completely inaccessible, but they were still, we were maintaining
there
them.
somehow?
Yeah, so it was
Wow.
on the disc, but there were no way to get to the stuff because they were these giant, like laser
Like
disc
laser
size.
disc kind of, where they're the
Yeah.
size of like a vinyl record, but it's a
Right.
CD
Yeah.
material.
Yeah, and
Huh.
but there was apparently nothing that could still read them, like that the state owned. And we just recently, we were working with KUNC because we have a bunch of their old tapes here,
Oh, okay.
and their anniversary is coming up, so they want to go back and revisit some of those tapes.
Okay.
So we're where they can access that, and so we've been digitizing that stuff.
Okay.
Slowly. And we have a few things that we can't even access. It's like huge old video formats, which are like
Oh,
bigger
yeah.
than VHS, and I'm sure you've seen them around.
Yes.
We have to send them out somewhere, and I gotta make very conscious decisions on what I want to spend money to.
Because of the cost of...
Yeah.
And that's got to be hard, though, because you don't actually know what's on them,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Until, I mean, they
Right.
probably have like a label or something, but depending on how exact the person who labeled it, if I had been working in that day, people would be cursing my name
Yeah.
because it would just say, graduation 19 whatever.
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
you'd be like, well,
Well,
which
thank you.
parts?
Yeah,
like,
I know. And that happens a lot. And then you can find like super cool things on those.
Right.
So like here we collect Michener stuff related to James Michener, and we actually have a film vault that we rent in LA that is filled with like film footage from Michener's documentaries that he worked on. So he had he worked with a documentary film company, and some of those I'm sure are some of like the dailies that are in there. There's no information except to say like Poland. So there's a
Right.
whole box of who knows what stuff they cut out.
Right.
Because there's really cool stuff on some of these Michener films. Like he interviewed a young Bill Clinton when Clinton had just become governor of Arkansas.
That's super cool.
So that would be really cool to see like what is the extra stuff that didn't actually make the cut.
Right.
Or he interviewed Pope John Paul II before he was Pope. So it's one of the
Okay.
few interviews that exists of the Pope when he was Cardinal V.W. I wish I could remember his name. Cardinal somebody.
That's really cool, though.
so-
Well, and because you don't know until later how significant that stuff is, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure they didn't know at the time Bill Clinton would be the president.
Right, yeah,
Or they
definitely.
didn't know that he would be the Pope later, you
Yeah.
know, all that stuff. Yeah, that's a weird thing, like what you were saying about what is significant and what's static.
Yeah.
You know, because Michener probably interviewed a bunch of people.
Yeah.
But they didn't all become president.
Yeah, certainly. Certainly not. Yeah.
Unless
so
he
there's-
had some kind of gift of like...
he could sense who was going to be the next president. Yeah, no, you don't know if which ones are important and which ones are just kind of trivial, and it's really difficult to decide what to throw away and what to keep because you can't keep everything.
Right.
And I've made that. I know in my profession I've made terrible mistakes where I've thrown away the wrong stuff. And often when we're archivists, since we're the last stop, when we throw
Right.
something away, we make sure it's gone. We like
Right.
shred it or we destroy it.
It's donezo.
It's done. Yeah. So
Wow.
like, I've done it by choice. I've made decisions like I don't think anybody would ever use these records, and then like 2 weeks later, somebody's like, "Hey, I'd love to see those records," and I'm like, "Oh, well,
Of course.
yeah,
Now, of all times.
they're dead." And I've also done it accidentally. Like one of the worst was I discovered these. I didn't realize they were. I don't know if you know about in old photography that you need a fixing agent to
Okay.
keep the picture from disappearing. And I assumed these pictures that I had just discovered would have had the fixing agent because that's crazy town for it not to have the fixing agent.
For them to survive this long
Yeah,
without it too.
they would have been in the dark forever. And so I had just pulled them out and I was going to work on them and I'd left them on my desk. And I came back the next day and they were completely blacked out because everything had disappeared and it just died because I left it on my desk.
Right.
And I didn't even think that,
Why? Yeah.
Yeah.
Why would you even think that?
yeah. But there were some cool pictures of like interior of mines and interior of mill work.
Wow.
And they're gone.
Yeah. Well, it seems like a weird thing too because there's a lot of static to get through,
Yeah.
right? To get to the good stuff. But then there's also this factor of stuff you're purposely getting rid of and then stuff that is getting rid of itself for
Right,
lack
yeah.
of a better way to say it. And so then what you're left with is there's a certain amount that you have to pick through, but then there's a certain amount that you don't get to choose.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
So that's-
definitely.
That seems like that would be frustrating to me. I'd be like, I want to choose. I don't want nature to decide.
Right, yeah, it is. It can be that way where something gets eaten by itself. Or,
Right.
And photos are terrible for that.
Right.
Like, they just disappear. I
Right.
mean, they're, even with a fixer, when people look back at like their grandparents or their parents' photographs and they're all turning bright red. I don't know if you've noticed that in some of the old pictures. That's because the dyes fade at different rates. So the
Right.
red is the strongest dye in there. So it lasts while the blues and the greens are just disappearing. So eventually the picture will just be straight red. There'll be nothing.
I did not know that.
So it is super frustrating. That's why we keep things cold in archives to slow down the chemical reactions.
Okay.
And it's the same with papers eating itself. The acid in the paper's eating it. So
Right.
we want to slow down the chemical reactions as best we can. There's even like there's a certain kind of film that was produced in the teens and the 20s primarily, silver nitrate film. I don't know if you know silver nitrate film, but it can spontaneously combust. If it gets warm enough, it will just catch on fire. And
Wow.
you know,
It just goes like flash paper then.
yeah, it is, and it burns super hot and super fast.
So it burns a lot of stuff around
Yeah,
it.
it burns stuff around it.
Wow.
So you, to be safe, you want to keep it frozen so that there's no chance.
So then I saw upstairs at one point there was some of Michener's stuff.
Okay, yeah.
There was like he had a desk lamp that was
Yeah.
supported by like an old can
Yes,
basically, and
yeah.
then I think one of his dentures was in there.
Yeah, yeah.
Is that something you were involved in? Is this like material that?
Well, that's pre-me, the
Okay.
setting that stuff out. And the teeth are something I would never normally pick to put out. It ended up here kind of mysteriously in that after Michener died, they kind of went in through his house and they just loaded up boxes of stuff. And it was a real mix of weird things. I mean, just personal items.
Just like his
Yeah,
whatever.
like tissues, like boxes of tissues.
Okay.
You know, and so we've gone through to kind of clear out things that are not. It's again making those decisions what are actually valuable for research. So whoever was the archivist before me just thought that the dentures would be a cool display item, and they are, to the extent that like everybody remembers that
Yes,
they see those.
I remember seeing them very distinctly.
Yes.
And thinking it was odd.
They think yes, but it sticks with them.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we also have like a pair of his eyeglasses up
Yeah.
there as well, which is weird.
Yeah.
Well, but
Yeah, it makes me think of, if I were to be well known
Yeah.
and then passed away and they went through my apartment, I'd be like, well, are they going to put what are they going to put in there? Like
Yeah.
my toothbrush?
Right,
Or,
yeah. Yeah.
if I could shepherd someone through, I'd be like, these would probably be interesting things to have. And I
Yes.
don't think I would go, I have a retainer
Yeah.
that I still wear. I don't know if I would
that's
be.
going on display
Yeah,
next
I
week.
mean, now I know.
Yeah, we should have alumni retainers. That would be beautiful.
Famous retainers of the world.
Yeah.
We'll have to just start with non-famous and work our way up.
Just expand our collecting area. It is a little strange. And at some point, we actually have hired a student, a graduate student who's working on Michener-related stuff. So
Okay.
we might revisit that display, but it's not been a high priority for me
Okay.
to update it. I've kind of left it as it was.
Sure.
We have one exhibit case up there that rotates displays, but the rest is pretty static.
Okay.
So it's supposed to, the teeth case is just supposed to be the funny case, I guess. I don't
Okay.
know. And
Sort of a novelty.
the novelty
almost.
case,
Yeah.
because I mean the desk lamp that's been taped to
Yeah.
the juice can is just to show how Michener was like to just use what he had available.
Right.
And he was, if he could make it work, he would make it work. He
Right.
didn't feel it was necessary to go buy a specialized desk lamp. He had
Right.
a desk lamp, so why not just make it work?
Right. Yeah, I should describe that a little bit. It's kind of a normal desk lamp, except I guess he wanted it to be taller.
Yeah, he wanted it to be taller.
And so he just took this old can. I mean, it's like an old juice can with the label still on
Yeah,
it.
the label is
and
still
he
on
just
it.
turned it upside down, stuck this lamp on top of it, and then it's like, there you go.
And then taped it on there. Yeah, it really was just and I think it is a cool thing to show his his desire to kind of use everything he had.
Right.
And his I think it also comes from his history of poverty, because he grew up really ridiculously poor. His adopted mother struggled a great deal. They actually ended up in the poorhouse for a while, and Michener did not want that for himself. But I think if you grow up in a very poor environment where there's not a lot of money, a lot of resources, you figure out how to make do, and he just always
Right.
did.
And then even when you are the Michener,
Yeah.
and you
Yeah, you remember.
library named after you
Yeah.
and stuff, but you're still, I wanted to ask you, like, this is kind of like a tough question,
Okay.
but I swear I don't mean it in
Yeah.
an aggressive fashion. What's, to you or to the industry, I guess, the importance of archiving one-of-a-kind physical objects? And, why does it matter to have something like Connie Willis's papers? We have the finished books, we have
Right.
digital versions of the books, all these things. So what to you, and then what is the industry standard or idea
Right.
of why does that matter?
Yeah.
Why does your life matter,
Yeah,
Jay?
I know. Yeah, no, that's a good question. And to start, I'll talk about like in graduate school, in particular. I remember reading an article which talks about the importance of the reel, and it was super influential in my life because there is a power to an actual object. And the article was specifically about slave shackles. So they're like, there's a difference when you bring in slave shackles that were actually used on a person as opposed to some sort of plastic reproduction. And it's a kind of an intangible thing about that realness. I know that's kind of...
No, that's a great example.
I mean, it's there is just something... There's no denying the
Right.
reality when it's right there in front of you.
Right.
And in the profession, we talk about intrinsic value versus informational value. So in certain cases in archives, we don't think that the actual format itself has any intrinsic value.
Okay.
So when you think about something not necessarily very exciting, the Board of Trustees minutes for an organization. So they're super important for the history of the organization, but it really doesn't matter if you've got the actual books. Yeah. You can record that information in a different format. You can digitize that, and that's just as valuable. You just need to be able to make sure that information doesn't disappear.
Right.
But there are certain things where there is an intrinsic value in the actual format itself.
I see.
So sometimes that's artistic. Sometimes it is just like I talked about with just like the slave shackles, there's just something there. And sometimes it's the information itself is connected somehow to the format, and there's no getting away from saving that format to save that item.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I mean, probably 90% of things, it's the informational value that's important.
Right.
There's a much smaller percentage where the actual format really does matter, or the actual original item. But when you think about Connie Willis's, when you use that example, so we do have the final book, but with the archival record, we've got the journey that leads you to that book, which is what's really valuable, I think, because you can see, it's almost like, I think like deleted scenes on your DVD player.
Okay.
So you can see that this entire scene was cut, this entire idea, this entire sub-theme in the book, or it transformed into something else. I know, like within Doomsday Book, there's an idea that she just gets rid of for Doomsday Book, and brings that idea back for To Say Nothing of the Dog. So it was the drowning of the kittens, I believe, which is used in To Say Nothing of the Dog, that first started out in Doomsday Book. And so you can see that transformation. And really, it's kind of amazing to see that journey in Connie Willis's book. So that's why that's really valuable there.
Because you can see that process.
Yeah.
In addition to the product.
Yeah.
Like you can see how the sausage was made a little bit.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh.
And how complex, because with literary archives like this, you can see there'll be like, sometimes there'll be like an outline, there'll be all the notes that they make, all the research drafts. And then like Connie's stuff, she writes and rewrites stuff so much. So like for Doomsday Book, I think it was the first chapter was rewritten 27 times.
Wow.
So, she starts and then makes minor changes, and then what you've got at the beginning to what you have at the end is a very different.
Completely, yeah.
So it's
Wow.
really cool. And you can see it in Michener stuff too.
Mm-hmm.
Like we have with Centennial, we have a book that was never published,
Mm-hmm.
that was written in the 50s,
Mm-hmm.
that's called Jefferson, which is a proto-Centennial. So a lot of the
Okay.
ideas that are developed and used in Centennial exist here,
Right.
and then they're just not fully fleshed out. So that
Right.
exists, on its own.
So really good, especially for, if you're somebody who's really interested in Michener,
Yeah.
or you're someone who is maybe really interested in writing or
Right,
something,
yeah.
and you're saying, how do these people do it?
Yeah.
And you can kind of go back and
Yeah.
look at these, heroes and
Yeah.
see what they were doing and say, oh, okay, well, Connie Willis didn't get it right out
Yeah,
of the gate.
yeah.
It took her 27 times
Yeah.
to really hit the tone she was looking for.
To be happy with what she gets. Yeah, and
That's cool.
and when I was at the state archives, for example, we maintained tapes of every single legislative session starting in the 1970s. And so we were always filled up. The reading room was always filled up with lawyers, well, probably paralegals,
Right.
who would listen to these tapes. They have the final law,
Right.
but they want to know what did they
happened
actually
that-
mean when they said these words in the law.
Oh,
And so
yeah.
they would be, for major, legislative actions, there'd be poor paralegals trapped in these listening rooms for days, just
Right.
listening to legislative
Camped
testimony.
out and-
Yeah, and they just...
Oh. Yeah, I guess I didn't think about that. I think about that maybe with artistic things that people want to know.
Yeah.
How did this come to be? But I hadn't thought about that with something like a law, but it makes a lot of sense, right? Because if you have a case and you're going to argue about the law, you're like,
Yeah.
well, why did this get created, and how does that apply to this situation?
Yeah.
But so it's important to know where it all came from.
Yeah, and what they actually meant. Yeah, because when you have the records, you can say this is the intent. This is the actual intent, because I have this person says this is what I mean by this.
Right.
And that doesn't happen that often, but you can dig through the material.
I did want to ask you about too. So most of us have some kind of sort of archive-y personal items. Like people will keep old journals, old photos, just that kind of stuff. Is there anything like you would suggest as far as things people might do to sort of better preserve these kinds of things, or better enjoy them maybe?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the big things that people need to do, just for preservation's sake, is, for God's sake, don't put it out in your garage ever. Stability of environment is super important for historic photographs and for papers and things like that.
Okay.
It's not best to put it in the basement
Right.
of a building because of water issues.
Right.
Those aren't huge deals, but a lot of times people just have things stored in terrible places. You got to think about, you don't want just boxes of photographs where the photos are touching each other, because if the temperature changes, or the humidity is really the problem, some of that coating on the outside will start to get moist, and then they'll stick together, and then you'll lose images. You don't want... I'm trying to think of other major problems like that. But one of the worst things are those horrible photo albums from probably the 80s and the 70s. The sticky photo
where
albums.
it's the sheet and
Yeah.
you pull it back and then stick the photos and then lay the sheet back over, and it has almost a staticky, sticky feel to it.
Yeah, it's got some kind of a gluey.
Yeah.
And those are terrible for photographs.
Okay.
So it's better not to keep your stuff in there, because it will eat through it.
Okay.
Digitization is great now. For
Yeah.
access
Right.
to be able to see stuff. I recommend that people. We create access copies for archival material. So these are the things that we'll use every day, so that we don't destroy the original. So we still got the original safe.
Right.
So that's important.
So that's a good way to enjoy it more,
Right.
is if you can digitize it.
Yeah.
Then you can enjoy that while not ruining
like destroying the original. Yeah, because the original can be easily destroyed by.
I see.
Like, don't eat barbecue while like looking at
Right.
your grandfather's World War One
Right.
service record. You know.
Be a little careful about
Yes. Yeah.
And then maybe like the other side of the question, let's say, I mean, most of us probably have from like a relative or something, shoebox full of pictures.
Right.
And we all kind of are like, I should go through this and get rid of some stuff, right?
Yeah.
What would you say, like, do you have any professional advice on like how to get rid of, how to pare that collection down to a manageable?
Well, it's really important to identify people before whoever gave it to you dies.
Oh, sure. Who's in this picture?
Yeah, because if you end up with a box of pictures that are completely unidentified and there's no markings on the back or there's no information, what good is it? Is a question. I mean, because that's something that we think about in archives. I mean, if there's absolutely no research value in a collection of photographs, why do we keep it? Or think of papers. If it comes from an unknown source, talking about an unknown item, do you actually need to keep that? So, I mean, if there's no possible way of ever figuring out what these images are, you got to ask yourself, do you need to keep that?
And go through them before, somebody... So I should go to my mom's house today and be like, okay, this picture of a house. What is this house?
Yeah,
why did we take a picture of this?
Yeah, why does it matter?
Like,
and if nobody knows, then it might not be worth keeping.
Who is this? Is this my great uncle? Or is this some guy standing outside the photo place and you were like, I have one picture left, so
I just got to get this done.
Whatever, yeah.
And sometimes it is, that, and you have a million random pictures that are just worthless. Yeah.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Weldcast. If you would like more information about the project or you would like to participate, please visit our website at www.weldcast.com or call 1-888-861-7323. This has been a production of the High Plains Library District.